Hello everyone, my name is Elena and I am part of Team Vortex 14969. I am in 10th grade and I am the outreach lead.
Hi, my name is Caitlin, and I'm also part of the team. I'm in ninth grade and I'm currently the documentation lead for the team. We're a community team based in the Bay Area.
In today's presentation, we will be talking about the engineering notebook and how you can write it, as well as how you can visually format it so it looks good. To start, we will talk about the parts of an engineering notebook. The engineering notebook can be split into many ways, and many teams have different ideas on how they want to split it. However, some of the main parts include the daily log, team plans, award documentation, engineering process, and team information. All of these parts hold their own importance, so make sure you include them somewhere.
Daily logs are one of the many important parts of an engineering notebook. They're basically meeting minutes or notes that are taken and written during team meetings. They document details during the day of the meeting, including meeting time, any goals that your team may have, the agenda for the meeting, completed tasks during or right before the meeting, and future tasks your team may hope to achieve. It's not necessary to include every detail of the robot because more in-depth documentation will come later, and it may be a little bit difficult for people to read and process. There are lots of different ways to organize these daily logs. Pictures are important because they help support daily logs with visual evidence of your work.
So over here we have two examples of daily logs. They are written in different formats, but they get the same kind of information across. On the left, we have a more kind of note-taker format, which presents everything in a note style. On the right, we have a grid type of format, which formats everything in a table with the different columns. However, the information from both of these will be the same to the judges. It's just the preference that many teams might have. They have the same kinds of information, such as the date and the time, as well as who's writing the notebook entry and some tasks that were done during the day.
As mentioned earlier, in-depth documentation is also another important part of your engineering notebook that you will have to include. This allows you to better explain components of your robot, your processes, and any events that you may have attended. This can be split into multiple categories. These include documentation of any outreach events you may have attended, engineering documentation for your more complex processes and buildings of the robot, your team's business plan, and documentation for any activities and work you may have done during the summer off-season. It's also important to include diagrams and pictures to again provide visuals to people who may read your notebook and proof of concept for the work your team did.
So over here, we have an example of an in-depth documentation. This is one for hardware, specifically a scissor lift documentation. On the top, we have the general information about it, such as the project name and who worked on it. We also have a roadmap. This roadmap shows the scissors lift's journey and progression. Then on the right, we have an example of the in-depth notes that we took on it. It shows the task that was done on a certain date, as well as our thoughts on it, the day's work.
Award documentation is another significant part of your engineering notebook that you have to include. In a competition, these are important because getting the Inspire Award guarantees advancement. You can get the engineering notebook as an important component of winning the Inspire Award at a competition. Getting the Think Award or a higher ranked placement in the NorCal Regional Championships can advance you to the World Championships. Many teams also choose to put their award documentation packets in the front pocket of their engineering notebook because this allows judges to quickly see important information. You include only what you need in your award documentation. For example, in the control award documentation, you may most likely include autonomous movements, sensors used to achieve these movements, and any other advanced programming that you may have implemented into your robot. For the Think Award, you can include innovative designs for your robot, CAD models and files, and processes that you use to build the robot in an interesting way.
Next, we will talk about the judge interview. This isn't actually part of the engineering notebook, but it is related. This is because, like the engineering notebook, during the judge interview, you want to tell the judges about your team and make your team look good and stand out among others. One good way to prepare for your judge interview is by looking through your engineering notebook. You can find important details in your engineering notebook, which will make it easier for you to talk to the judges. Make sure you put an emphasis on your achievements. During the judge interview, you will also be presenting your engineering notebook in robot.
It's also important to practice writing these sections for the engineering notebook so that you can adjust to the processes and continue to write better entries. Write a practice daily log entry on any activity that you do this week. Make sure to write important details such as date, time, and any people that were involved in the task. Utilize the ideas that you've learned throughout this presentation. For example, have you done any projects during quarantine? Projects can include anything from art, hardware, school projects, essays, personal projects, hobbies, etc. Write a detailed documentation entry on it to practice honing your skills.
And now we will be moving on to part 2 of our presentation, which is about visuals and formatting and making sure that your engineering notebook looks good so that it's easier for the judges to read.
Visuals and formatting are both essential. They are the outer presentation and will represent what everyone, especially the judges during your interview, will initially be able to see. It's important to make a good first impression, and when used correctly, visuals can help do that. For example, elements such as outlining your entire engineering notebook, choosing certain fonts and colors to make the visuals harmonious, organizing your engineering notebook by section so it's easy to absorb the information, and finally, branding, including some of your team logos or colors in the notebook.
One good way to start with your engineering notebook formatting is by outlining. Outlining takes place throughout the whole engineering notebook as well as within one page. Throughout the entire notebook, it's a good idea to use a table of contents. Many teams choose to do this because it allows judges to quickly find certain things that they want to see. Along with the table of contents, you will need to include page numbers on your pages as well. Other than the table of contents, you can also use outlining within the specific pages of your engineering notebook. As mentioned before, you can use bullet points to show different items, but you can also use charts to show them too.
Here are two examples of outlines and entries of an engineering notebook. For the example on the left, while the information may be good, it is not very coherent if it's not well organized. On the right, we have a timeline example that's color-coded. It's much more coherent and visually representative to the reader, and it's easier for the judges to follow your processes.
Next is organization. Once you have finished roughly outlining your content and information, it's very important to make sure that it is all presented in an orderly manner. This is so that it's easier for judges to understand your information, and it will make your information more clear so that you are more likely to be recognized for it. For example, if the judges see two notebooks of the same information, but one is really messy and one is well organized, they are more likely to pay more attention to the well-organized notebook because it's easier for them to understand and read through. When thinking about organization, it's a good idea to pay attention to visual organization and clear arrangement, as well as sectioning your notebook. This is like putting everything in the same section that we mentioned earlier in the presentation, such as the daily logs and the in-depth analyses. You should also put the pages in the daily logs and in-depth analyses in order within the sections as well. So for the daily logs, you might choose to put these in chronological order, and for the in-depth analysis, you projects. For example, putting hardware projects in one section, software projects in another, etc.
Fonts and colors present a good visual impression on any viewers of your engineering notebook. They can contribute to team branding as well as readability. Choosing the correct combination of visuals can make your notebook easier or harder to read and understand. For example, sectioning with fonts and colors. You can have larger headings with different colors to separate main items from the actual content of your notebook. The same goes for organizing with fonts and colors. These can be included anywhere from charts to table of contents, simple daily logs where you may need to list items. Team branding formats are also important. Having a certain color scheme or an aesthetic that your team may implement into the logo and rest of your notebook is also important. Color combinations can work if used correctly. For example, you may not want to choose a light color on a light background because it makes the content difficult for the judges to read and organize.
Here are two examples of ways you can use fonts and colors. Over on the left, we have a well-organized section with sans serif and serif font. These are two font types that are a good idea to use because they are easy to read and understand. Along with that, we have a very simple color scheme of dark purple with black. This is helpful for the judges because it won't hurt their eyes to read it, and it's easy for them to understand the text as black and dark purple are easy to read on light pages. However, on the right, it might be harder for judges to understand what the writing is saying here. While it's a good idea to use a more popping out font for the heading, such as the one displayed here, it shouldn't be used for the body text. Display fonts and script fonts are okay for headings, but when used too much, such as in body text, it can be hard for judges to read through. Additionally, it's not a good idea to use bright colors, as Caitlin mentioned before. You can see here that the bright colors might be hard for judges to keep up when reading.
As mentioned earlier, team branding is a significant aspect of your engineering notebook. This branding will help contribute toward identification among other teams and helps you stand out at tournaments. Including your team logos, theme and color, and number/name wherever you can, as well as perhaps some additional first branding to notify viewers what the notebook may be for, can be helpful in promoting your team image to judges, other teams, and viewers. Designing a logo is important because it will help identify your team, among others, again. Choosing a color theme can also help contribute to this if you use it consistently throughout your notebook and is recognizable when compared to others. Logo placement as well as number and name placement are also important to consider because if not used correctly, they may block the reader from efficiently processing all the rest of the information in your notebook. Lastly, cover designs are very important because they will be the first thing that anyone who picks up your notebook will see. It's good, again, to make a good first visual impression on anyone who's reading the notebook, especially the judges.
And here's another practice you can do. In the earlier practice, we had you write an engineering notebook entry on something you did earlier this week. For this practice, you'll practice making that entry look nice. You can use whichever formatting, fonts, colors you want, and you might even want to include a logo somewhere. You can try out different formatting as well, so that you can see whichever one you like the most. Thank you for listening to our presentation.